I hear that Nancy Pelosi is pretty bad at public speaking. I mean, she's pretty terrible at this. Even when it appears that her heart might be in the right place, she ends up saying and doing the most tone deaf things like this.
Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous.
Oh, wow. How are you this bad at this? Oof. I mean, look, she's been in Congress for like a million years. How does she still somehow end up being so incredibly cringe and tone deaf? George Floyd, let me be clear. My problem with her statement is that George Floyd did not sacrifice himself for justice. Okay, there was no justice in this case. Okay, one of the three guilty verdicts. That's not justice. That's accountability. Okay, he was murdered by a police officer. George Floyd was. So it just total cringe. Wow. Yes, for being the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi is absolutely terrible at communication. True, true. Suffice to say, she got ratio to oblivion um, on Twitter. Here's what one person says. Thank you, George Floyd, for being murdered. Another person says, murder victims are not martyrs. You're not sacrificing your life when your life is taken from you. This ain't no barbecue cookout kumbaya situation. We wouldn't have to fight if there wasn't a murder in the first place, if the systems weren't messed up. It's almost as if Nancy Pelosi is a person that has a lot of power in our current government and that they could actually, I don't know, do something about this. Now, finally, the Democrats are looking somewhat towards police reform, even though there were reports, and I could not find the report earlier, but last night I had seen something scrolling around a report where Democrats were first talking about how, oh, now that George Floyd, or I should say Derek Chauvin, um, had been convicted of 3 counts, we're going to pull back on some of our police reforms because the system's working as intended. Now, I couldn't find that. I can't source that. And now a lot of Democrats, at least in some of the reports, are saying, no. This reignited the push for reform, which is the correct way to go. Um, but yeah, it's. I mean, they are endemic in the system, and they have not only refused to change the system up until now, but it also, especially in the case of Joe Biden and being, when he was a congressman, pushing more of this tough on crime stuff. So they are part of the problem. And if you don't want to be part of the problem, then you should really start actually being part of the solution. And that's just not going out and saying platitudes like this. So now, more here. Timothy Burke says an absolutely bizarre statement from Pelosi about a man murdered by law enforcement. Dana Goldberg says, I love Pelosi, but George Floyd didn't sacrifice his life for justice. He was murdered by Derek Chauvin. Words matter. They absolutely do. They absolutely do. Um, Another person says, thank you, bus, Nancy Pelosi at the end of Speed. That's a good reference. Another person says, thank you for your sacrifice for iceberg awareness, Titanic. Mm. Another person says, thank you, murdered person, for without your horrific killing, we would never have known that it's not okay to kill people for no reason. And a couple more here. Edward Angueso Jr. says this. This is even worse than when they wore kente cloth and kneeled for 8 minutes. Oof. That is incredibly cringe. Kente. I remember that. This is. I mean, for people in power to go and do this essentially this performative stuff, and that's what this is, performative, right? Instead of actually pushing legislation, we don't want to hear platitudes. The black community does not want to hear platitudes. They're the one that are suffering the most. What they want is action. What people want is for you to actually do something. You know, use whatever power you can to push legislation that will help. And look, there is legislation. And so I'm not saying that they're not doing that. What I'm saying is that we could do without the platitudes. Because right now, what you have, and this tweet is a good example of this, Nathan McDermott points out that there seems to be a reoccurring train of thought among some white liberals that black people exist to suffer and purge America of its sins. I think that's an excellent point. And here's the thing about this, right? Again, this verdict, as good as it was essentially the bare minimum. It's the bare minimum. But you've got libs out there that are saying that this is the end of racism, celebrating it like it's the end. Racism's over. Look at that. We got justice for George Floyd. No, we didn't. No, this is the beginning of the fight. And yes, I understand we got to take the W on this, but without systemic change, this is going to continue happening. In fact, it had happened as soon as, like during the time that the verdict was being read. There was another, this time a black woman that was shot and killed by a police officer for having a knife. Look, there are ways, again, going back to the Dylan Roof example, there are ways that you can take someone who is armed into custody without killing them. You don't need to kill everyone. And unfortunately, what we have is a situation where police will kill black people at higher instances with white people. One man going to jail is not going to fix America. The only thing that we need now to do is to do systemic change. That, of course, does take time. It does take legislation, and it does take a change, a shift in culture. Now, Pelosi, of course, did attempt to clarify this. She came out later and said George Floyd should be alive today. His family's calls for justice for his murder were heard around the world, did not die in vain. We must make sure other families don't suffer the same racism, violence, and pain. And we must enact the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And so I'm going to link that in the video so you get more details about the legislation that they're trying to do. That said, I don't think Nancy Pelosi should be allowed in front of a camera anymore. Not without, like, prepared remarks. She does not do very well. And let me tell you, from this to remember with the We Feed Them during an interview with CNN, she is terrible. No, I don't believe in lizard people, but if anybody could point to somebody and be like that, I think that could be a lizard person. Might be Nancy Pelosi. Just no, I don't believe in lizard people. But she is just so tone deaf, disconnected. And look, Nancy Pelosi has a million other problems. She is, of course, disconnected from the American people. We've seen that. She's also corrupt. She also takes a lot of money from corporations, do their bidding, stifles progressive policy, all that stuff. And so Nancy Pelosi, just unmitigated disaster. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.